I mean, every transporter thinks they know their operation. The moment you can show them something out of their operation, which surprises them, then you've got them interested and intrigued. And then you actually have kind of opened the mind to then listen to what you think your solution could potentially be.
Welcome, builders, to How Would You Build It? The podcast that dives deep into the dynamic world of startups and product creation right here in South Africa and Africa. This show is more than just interviews. Every week, we sit down with the brilliant minds to provide a masterclass for building digital products amidst the challenges and opportunities unique to our continent. From seasoned founders to dynamic product managers, we uncover the unique stories and strategies behind some of the most innovative digital products being built. So for all the aspiring founders and product builders out there, you'll discover that each episode is a wealth of practical wisdom and local and actionable insights. Make sure to subscribe or follow wherever you listen to our podcasts and connect with us on social media for even more content. Now, let's dive into today's episode. Welcome, builders, to another episode of How Would You Build It? It's episode 77, and I have to be honest, I'm starting to struggle to keep up with all these numbers, but I'm really excited because we've got another exciting startup with us today. But as always, first, Renier, my co-host, how are you doing this afternoon?
Yeah, great, Robbie. Lucky to be here. Excited to have a guest that's sitting in a car.
Yeah, I think it's our
Which is
first,
a
right?
first.
Yeah,
It's a
it's a first. And we'll get into
But there's a reason.
there's a story behind it, absolutely, which I'm really excited to hear. So first and foremost, Justin, thank you for joining. How are you doing this afternoon? How's the weather there?
Great, thanks. Yeah, great, thanks. So quite dry in Joburg. So you see me sipping some water because I'm not
Okay.
used to this dry air.
It's
Yeah.
always so dry in Joburg. If you're not used to it, it gets you every time, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I would love to talk rugby and, Eben and all the great things that happen, all the winning that's happening out there. Isn't it just so great? And these startups that we're meeting along the way, is also really cool, all the winning in South Africa. But
happening.
Justin, I think, yeah, it's great. And Justin, you're fresh off the launch on the 2nd of October. You relaunched GoMetro. Can you just tell us about it? Tell us about your startup and how things are going.
Yeah. So we've launched on the 2nd of October a vehicle called ecnomics, and we've launched a charging proposition called Flex EV. Yeah, I've been building GoMetro since 2014. And yeah, relaunched it many times as every entrepreneur does.
Mhm.
But on the 2nd of October, we were very excited to showcase South Africa's first electric minibus, and we're naming it ecnomics, which is called for Into the Future. And we feel that
Nice.
this is a vehicle, a model that will take us into the future, as well as a Afrocentric, taxi-oriented charging model called Flex EV, which doesn't take charging concepts from Europe and tries to apply it into Africa, but really tries to model the way taxis operate and how they operate today to offer charging services, fast charging services for the future of electric taxis and commercial vehicles.
Fascinating
Justin,
industry.
This is massive, but it's quite a jump from GoMetro, although GoMetro has always been in public transport. So do you maybe just want to start with the GoMetro story, quickly give us a bit of background? What led to you coming to this point, realizing there's opportunity?
Yeah. So I'm a transport engineer, a transport geek by very nature, and been building products and been fascinated by technology. So I've always tried to be at the intersection of transport systems and technology. Now in 2012, that meant mobile phones, because Android was coming out and iPhone was gaining prominence and BBM was around. So in 2012, GoMetro launched with the very first real-time train announcement system in Cape Town. And then we rolled it out to Gauteng and KZN and Eastern Cape. And suddenly we had this national app, and we were in the top 10 of Nokia apps on the old J2ME. We were on Mixit, you could get your train times and Mixit. And what was awesome is that we built this proposition that got to about 200,000 users at its peak. And we were able to really make an impact on people's lives. People were able to show their boss, look, the trains are late, and were able to save their jobs. They were able to, if the trains were delayed in the afternoon, they could phone home and arrange for someone else to pick up their kids from daycare. And so I really learned the value of information, and the intersection of technology and transport can be powerful. GoMetro then, we just grew the platform and the proposition, and you start with trains, Then we moved to buses. And you just can't ignore the dominant mode in South Africa, which is the minibus taxi. So in 2015, we launched a project called Mapping Bellville. And we built this little map of Bellville public transport, Bellville being the second most populous node of public transport in Cape Town. About 250,000 people go through Bellville every day using taxis, buses, and trains.
Wow.
And so we built the first taxi map. And you were able to go from Bellville, where can I get to? And more importantly, how much is the fare to that place?
100%.
And what was awesome about that is we launched it. It was a digital mapping exercise. We then got some graphic designers to make it like a Transport for London map, right? Like its own identity. And then the taxi operators started taking that map and sticking it on the window and owning that like as their identity. So again, power of information and the power of data. And then we realized that, well, the taxi is easy to actually work with. It's a little shuttle. And there are these little micro businesses. And so the GoMetro built a mapping platform so that we could get a total market assessment of taxis in a city. And we launched this, like you could call it digital twin model approach, where we would sample a specific amount of taxis that were representative of the population, extrapolate the population with some rules, and then drive some simulations until we get to an equilibrium. And so we could have a digital twin model of taxi operations in Rustenburg and get it down to like how many passengers, how many trips, how many kilometers, how much fuel, how many drivers.
What year was this?
2016. 2016, we built the Rustenburg digital twin.
Where were you in my life? I was working at Sweep South and I was running the exact same project for what we were doing.
Oh no.
To give you context, we had, so if you think of Sweep South is getting a cleaner to your house, right? Like Uber, right? So because it's a free market, it's a gig economy, what was happening is that you had ladies that were living in Khayelitsha getting booked in Fish Hoek. And we were like, this cannot happen because just to your point, like they would have to go from Khayelitsha to, let's say, Bellville to, say, Rondebosch. And it was like, what's the point of doing that long mission? So we had this whole project where we had to map out Cape Town, Durban, Joburg, and try and minimize saying, okay, but those areas should only service those areas. It was a hell of a mission. It was such a project. I could have just asked you guys.
I love stories like this because it's like a whole adjacent possible scenario about how things suddenly become possible. So mobile phones meant we could do things like Sweep South. And then that brings their own challenges about like coordination and logistics. And then that brings its own challenges. So yeah, it's been fascinating running into people who at various stages in the last decade have been working on the exact same problem in their own sphere, their own lens.
Because I can throw a curveball in there and in Cape Town with the trains, like when they started burning the trains, and we literally saw it in the data how the time of arrivals were changing because now they all had to pivot to the taxis. And that's how we like, okay, we better learn the taxi industry now and the maps that they're using and the routes they use because the trains are out of use. It was fascinating time. I can only imagine where you were at, in the forefront of also doing all of this work. Geez, we should have been friends.
Yeah, I will, it's never too late. And then we kind of took that platform into more cities and perfected the approach. And then two things happened is we started working more in Africa and seeing the minibus isn't always the mode of choice. So in East Africa, it's the two-wheeler that wins. In West Africa, it's also two-wheeler, but also some bus. And they've got these things called tros or danfos, which operate a bit differently to taxis. And so kind of learning how the continent moves and having our tech work used. And then we started getting calls from Albania, and we used the same tech in Albania to help the city of Tirana rearrange their bus network into a more formalized network. And this year they've launched onto Google Maps using GoMetro's mapping tech in the background. We've done some similar work in India and Pakistan. We were mapping things in Mexico. And so, like between 2017 and 2020, we started getting our ideas out of South Africa into the global stage and finding that there is a real appetite for it. And I mean, South Africa is seen as a leader in how you formalize informal transit. It's called informal transit, paratransit, popular transport. It's got all these different names in the literature. And then in each city, they've got their local name for it. So we call it minibus taxi. Ghana calls it trotro.
And that's
Nigerian call it
informal
danfo.
transport.
Yeah, and it's more like the French call it artisanal transport. So it's like a little guy who can afford a little van. He starts moving, and then he buys another van and another van, another van. It's never launched as a service with routes and rules. It kind of just aggregates and finds a natural equilibrium. But it's been really cool to see how South African thinking is really driving the global agenda around incorporating this sector into the formal economy on its terms, like not your terms. So before we kind of, South Africans started influencing transport thinking, the thinking was you build a bus lane, you build a BRT, you build these glass stations, you launch them, you run them, and then everybody jumps from the like dirty, stinky, filthy taxi straight into the shiny, clean bus because you know why? Smart card. And it's just like when it's just, there's a logic gap around the fact that these guys know their routes. They know what the community wants. They know how the city operates. If you're offering a smart card and an app and a glass station and air conditioning, you're not going to move the community to this shiny new thing. And so we've seen it where we've launched lots of BRT systems in South Africa and they just have not taken. And the taxi, it just always will be resilient. And so the position that we've the data shows is that the taxi always finds a way, and you can never squash it. You can never rule it. So you just got to figure out how to steer this water into productive channel.
And Justin, I think, you're saying the taxi finds a way. It's almost applicable in so many areas of business, right? It's the entrepreneur finds a way, right? Because this person is an owner and his income depends on it. So he makes a plan to win, right? So you cannot match that creativity at the scale at which these things operate. Like you can put buses on routes, they're just going to find a creative way to get the passengers before they get to the bus stop. And at scale, you simply cannot be as creative. You need an ownership model, and that's why I think that, one of the reasons why I love the industry, because I think it's just so empowering, and it is it's really creative in solving the problem of getting people where they need to go.
Yeah.
Sometimes in the yellow lanes, albeit, but I mean, they do get very creative in getting people there.
But there's reason and logic behind the yellow lines as well. There's this risk reward calculation, and
if you can do an extra trip, you up your income by 25% for the day. I mean, I get it.
Yeah. And then the business GoMetro, we've been growing really, really steadily. We've had to, as any platform in a space like this, we're solving wicked and big problems. And the solution, and as technology moves along, the solution, the toolkit that you've got changes, but the solution has to change as well. So we went from mapping and data into operational assessments and looking at how do we introduce rationality into this market? If there's too many taxis on the road, how do we get them to coordinate together and operate together? And we were part of a really, really exciting project that's been documented and published by the city of Cape Town called the 7th Avenue Experiment, where a taxi association in Mitchell's Plain, and there's a South African Transport Conference paper I advise you go read by a gentleman called Nico McLaughlin and another gentleman called Simon Sadier, which and I can send you the link to that, but it really outlines the case and proves the case around, there was this taxi association with about 80 vehicles. They did a demand survey around where do they move, what are the roads that they stand on? And then they launched a scheduled service. So they said, okay, every 15 minutes, rather than waiting to fill, every 15 minutes, we're going to push you into the road. And you're going to go onto the route every 15 minutes, and there's going to be a circular going. And they raised ridership, the same population, same suburb. They raised ridership by like 20%. They could park half the vehicle because there was a much more efficient circulation. And the total fuel consumption dropped by 30%. So they had more revenue, less cost, and less capital risk.
Because
just by,
And the amazing thing with that is because we know that a taxi doesn't want to drive if it isn't full. That was one of the biggest problems we also found. They would sit waiting. I'm not going to leave this destination until I have my taxi full, because they're trying to optimize every kilometer that they ride. So being able to do that, the question I have is like, how do you educate them on that? How do you let them know about these efficiencies that you're providing them and the returns thereof? Because I think it's like a behavioral change. You have to let them know, like, hey, if we do it this way, you can do X better. Did that land?
Yeah. So I've, I've launched technologies into bus fleets, taxi fleets, truck fleets. And let me just tell you, like, a transporter is the same regardless of what he's doing, whether it's freight or public transport. It's, don't tell me about my business. I've been doing this for years. So, like, trust me, I know this. What do you know? You haven't been in trucking or taxis or buses for 20 years. So who are you? And, you must understand we're different. So whatever you did and you got a case study for that city, it's not going to work here because you don't understand us. And so you have to listen. So the first you have to absorb the resistance, and you have to respect the expertise. And then you say, all right, let's run a pilot on your system. Let's collect data on what's going on your roads. And then let's sit down and let's look at your numbers. And so you've got to run them like through a process where they remain skeptical until you show them data on their operation that they weren't expecting to see. So at GoMetro, we've got a tire pressure monitoring system called Connect Tire. And every owner I meet tells me, don't worry, we've got 200 trucks, we check the pressure. Every time the truck leaves, we check the pressure. And I say, okay, let's just put this kit on 2 of your trucks. You've got 200, pick 2 of them, random, and let's just run it for 2 weeks. I kid you not, we always have a puncture, deflation, some issue that happens on one of the 2 trucks that we picked out of 200. And then the owner's like, okay, tell me more about that system. So before you want to tell someone what you think the answer is, you gotta listen. You gotta firstly listen to their experience, their expertise. You gotta listen in the gaps around what the assumptions are that they're making, because they think their operations are great. I mean, every transporter thinks they know their operation. The moment you can show them something out of their operation which surprises them, then you've got them interested and intrigued. And then you actually have kind of opened the mind to then listen to what you think your solution could potentially be.
Like a first principles approach. It's like an Elon Musk. It's very on Elon Musk here. Like, hold on, we can take rockets to Mars. I'll show you. Check this data.
Yeah, precisely. Yeah, that's exactly right.
So,
and then I've had,
go for it, Justin.
Yeah. No. And so, the other cool thing about the business, just to talk about where GoMetro has been over the last few years. So we've been in South Africa. We've got this really great product set, and it's this whole thing we speak about as South Africans, that you solve a very difficult problem in South Africa, and then you take it to the rest of the world. Now, taking it to the rest of the world is really difficult. And we went through phases now, from 2017, 18, we were trying to get it into new markets and, trying to launch from South Africa into other markets, trying to go and set up an office in London and distribute it from the UK because there's kind of common time zones and language, and just like trying to find partners and distributors. And so for about 5 years, we tried to do this kind of distribution side of things. And I would say that's probably the most difficult thing as a South African founder to do, is try to find international distribution at scale that allows you to, enter the market, whether it's the UK, Europe, America, whatever it is. It takes 3 times as long. It takes twice as much money, a few times as much money, and you have to hire and fire 3 rounds of people in those markets that you think are going to win it for you. I'd say the biggest challenge for GoMetro has been internationalizing. But, we launched it, we went into a joint venture with a company, the Ascendal Group, a bus group, which gave us access to the South American market, the UK market, Hong Kong. They were the second biggest operator in Hong Kong. And that kind of, we found that one partner, and they opened doors onto the global stage and gave it credibility. And then last year, we were able to raise quite a significant Series A with Zenobi Energy and with Future Growth, and being now able to enter the international electric bus and truck markets and finding distribution channels. So where we've landed is a really good place in terms of international distribution and revenues growing in South Africa, outside South Africa, and kind of an international business. but 5 years of trial and error and trial and error and some more trial and some more error. So, I think that's probably the biggest thing I can aspect I can tell your audience of South African entrepreneurs is don't underestimate how long it's going to take you to internationalize. Don't put your eggs in one basket, and like give yourself the time and the runway you need to find the right partners. Because once you do, you go places. But until you do, you feel like you're throwing money in the wind.
So on that, Justin, international expansion. I mean, I've heard so many shock stories and horror stories of people going, "Cool, we're going to go to a new territory. We're going to be spending money in the territory." Do you think there's any value in doing that? Or, I mean, you just spoke about finding a partner. Would you recommend that the best way to do it is find someone that knows how to do it over there and just work via them?
So, I think you got to pick a global hub. So, like a conference in Cape Town, someone is coming for a nice time on the beach and maybe attending a day or two if they are a VP at Facebook or a VP at Google. But the guy that goes to the UK conference or the Dubai conference or the New York conference, that's a real decision maker who wants to make decisions. So getting out of Cape Town is really important because you're going to meet a much higher order decision maker that can connect dots for you. But then the other thing is the entire globe's startup founders are flying into London, New York, Dubai for a week to do some meetings and back again. And so if you're serious about it, so pick a strategy and pick a hub. We picked the UK and we picked London because it's public transport. London's known for buses. It's doing really progressive things. And we had the makings of a network, and we landed up at an accelerator, the Intelligent Mobility Accelerator in 2017 in Milton Keynes for a few months. So we had a bit of a reason to be there. But I had to go back probably every 3 months for a week or two at a time, except for COVID when you couldn't travel, just so that people knew, oh, Justin's coming again. Like it's like having customers in Joburg and you live in Cape Town. They're like, when you're in Joburg again, it's the same thing in like picking a hub. You can't go to a conference and magic happens. You got to have gone to London, like I did, for months and months with false starts, hoping one day you have the right coffee, the right lunch, or the right dinner. And in our case, we were very fortunate to do that.
And I mean, it's just that age-old business thing. There's no shortcut. You need to build relationships and you need to build trust and authority. And in some opportunities start appearing. And, doing that in person is just so much more effective than trying to do it, via email from South Africa.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's get into the EVs.
Yes.
Tell us about
the
that.
EVs,
How did you get to EVs? And then, I mean, on the one side, you're building a data platform and those things. Building a car is something completely different. Like how did that happen?
So I'm just buying a car. I'm not building a car.
Okay, great.
Yet.
Oh, yeah. So I believe in the power of technology and transport to intersect and make lives better. So it was mobile phones, then it was big data, then it was digital twins, then it was cloud computing, and then it was optimization and DRTO. We didn't even speak about the demand responsive transit phrase of 2019, where everyone thought vans were going to save the world. And turns out, as Jarrett Walker of Human Transit says, you can't be geometry. So, we even went through our own shuttle. What is that thing called Swivel, which had a crash on the NASDAQ. We had our own little vanny thing we tried to launch called Flexi Flex, which was an Alan Gray staff transport shuttle thing. I ran it for 2-3 months, saw the data, and shut it down after that. Like it was a failed.
Leave the staff shuttles to Villani. He's been working that thing forever.
Precisely. So so that was just a slight detour. So when Flex the van as a concept, I mean, we mothballed it. I looked and said, okay, what's coming next? And mainstream electrification was coming down the line in that China had 19,000 buses in one city alone. Chile had ordered 1,000 buses. London, I think, was at 500 electric buses at that stage now. So I thought, whoa, what's going on here? And when I dug into it, I found that electric buses were just taking the market by storm. There was a big push by BYD before there was even a talk about any cars. They were the world's leading electric bus provider to global markets. And I started understanding that I started believing this would be the next big thing in transit. So we started researching and reading and consuming all we could as a research team at GoMetro on electric buses. And the guys that were part of that, think group, the one now is the head of TUMI, which is the German nonprofit's global e-bus rollout. And he's in like 100 different cities trying to roll out buses. The other guy that worked for me, who was part of that group, he's now at Green Cape as their EV specialist. So the guys that we all worked on, we've all gone our separate ways in business, but we're all in EVs. So there's this almost like this GoMetro EV collective that started in 2019 when we were thinking, what's the next big thing? And we convinced ourselves that EVs are, and we had to figure out a way into that market. I then did a report and a big study for a client around using our data around Africa, a big multilateral funding agency, to answer the question, how will Africa electrify first? Will it be bikes? Will it be big buses? Will it be vans, passenger cars? What's the segment that will go electric first?
When did you do the study?
2020 and 2021.
Okay.
So it was, and it was challenging because it was during COVID. So you had to make these findings like travel. We've
Some
now
assumptions.
subsequently, totally, and like Zoom calls and hoping that those reports are accurate. But we've subsequently
Teams meeting.
No, I've got antivirus, so I don't do Teams. Boom, baby. But we've subsequently visited Lagos, Nairobi, Kigali, Gaborone, Maseru, and looked at what's going on the ground and realized, okay, buses are going to be fine. We're going to get electric buses. There's some amazing startups doing electric buses already in Africa. Vans are going to be fine, or like little commercial vans are going to be fine. Cars, I think we're going to be a dumping ground for ICE vehicles for a long, long, long time. So I think that the EV market's not going to, passenger cars are not going to go EV very, very, very soon. And then there was this big gap in our research. And I was left with this question at the end, which is, why isn't there an electric minibus? There's such a big market. Surely someone somewhere is building one. And after Googling and Googling and Googling every Chinese manufacturer you can think of, Turkish, German, I don't know, going everywhere to try Vietnamese, no one was making one. Some were making panel vans that they put seats in, but that's not legal in South Africa because, that we had the old thing. And one manufacturer we found was making it, but it was kind of like coming to end of life, a van. So I contacted them and I said, come out to South Africa, just have a look at how many of these vans are here. And then tell me what you think. And they came out and they saw all these white vans. And they asked, okay, well, what do you need? And so I said, well, give me a price. I want to know if it's viable. Give me a price of what it would cost to ship. And I still remember I was just curious now. I'm just the entrepreneur who's, I just want to see what the numbers are. And they sent me a price, and I think it was like $40,000 at factory door. And then obviously there's shipping and taxes and duties and other stuff. But I was like, 40 times 18. Whoa, that's actually price competitive with the models on the road today. This could work. And then I'd learned about this concept of total cost of ownership, where you look at the total lifespan of an asset and its energy consumption as its cost. Did some numbers and found that, okay, if a taxi guy bought an electric taxi, even at that price, with all the duties and taxes and all the barriers, he would save 2 million Rand at the end of 10 years over the lifespan of the asset, even after paying double on the sticker price. And so again, conceptually just thinking, how do you make this happen? I'd scratched that first itch of why isn't there an electric minibus, by finding the one automotive model that isn't a panel van conversion, that is 5.8 meters by 2.5 meters, because it must fit in a taxi rank, right? It can't be a little bus. It can't be a 30-seater bus. It's got to be a taxi. And And then, like I got a bit tired of all the manufacturers trying to sell me a 9-meter bus. Yes, we have a minibus. It's 9 meters long. And so when you're almost like after searching and searching and searching on this intellectual journey to answer this question, you kind of think to yourself, look, man, you got to be part of this. Like if you found that little gem, right, that little nugget, you kind of like, you're going to ask, okay, how far can we take this? And so we announced a research consortium. We approached some partners and we raised some funding to fund the purchase of some vehicles, the testing of some vehicles, supporting infrastructure. Like it's not just like, I said I bought a van, but you kind of, you're buying a problem, it's like anything that goes wrong with it, it's a one-off. Anything that you got to fix, it's a one-off, anything that is, challenging with it, it's, yeah. So, we've got a great consortium together. We've got University of Stellenbosch, Professor Boyson. We've got the Center for Sustainable Environmental Sciences. We've got Power Fleet, used to be known as Mixed Kinematics. I think they're in South Africa known as Mixed Kinematics by Power Fleet now. Yeah. We've got ACDC Dynamics, the electric equipment provider. HSW Global, who's an electronic provider in Somerset West. They build IoT devices. And GoMetro with all its data. Put this consortium together and said, all right, let's launch the vehicle to the market. Let's announce it and see what happens. Because we're going to bring it in. And when we announced it about 1.5 years ago, then that week, the presidency phoned me and said, are you serious? DTIC phoned me, Department of Trade, Industry and Competition phoned me, like, oh, can we talk? IDC said, hey, can we have a chat? BIC. So suddenly, like, South Africa, you're not used to government phoning you. You're normally the one on hold for hours and hours and hours. And it was during that JetP phase, right? So we had just announced this big JetP thing. So, and no one was quite sure how to ask for money. And so they thought, like a lot of electric taxis would use up a lot of the JetP funding. So let's figure out how we ask for that money. And so, suddenly we had public sector really interested in what we're doing. The private sector had already come on board. A lot of the private sector started contacting us. A lot of the taxi association bodies started contacting us. Taxi financing companies started. So you're sitting there with this novelty and it's sparking conversations. It's now suddenly almost adjacently possible to have an electric minibus in South Africa. It's still a nuts idea because load shedding's happening. The taxi industry strikes, I don't know, you name the barrier and it's there.
Yeah.
And so it's still a nuts idea, but if everyone's talking about it, then as South Africans, you're going to find a solution one by one until eventually we have something that maybe, can work. And so that was the turning point where we were like, okay, let's see where this goes and let's see how this goes. And that's why I'm sitting in one in Joburg
Awesome.
Right now.
Yeah. So Justin, give us the specs. Like, how many seats? How big is it? Where does it come from? What is the range like? If it needs to charge, how quickly can we get to that 80% mark? Where they can hit the road again.
Lekker. So it is the exact same footprint as a Toyota Quantum or a Nissan NV350. So it sits on a wheelbase that's similar, a little bit longer, I think. And it's got 2.5 meter width and 5.8 meter length. And it's about 200 mils higher than your typical model. So it's got a little bit more headroom. It's got a lower center of gravity because the batteries are at the bottom. So it can have a bit more height. The manufacturer's name is Eiger. They are Scania's partner in China. So any Scania coach you see on the roads of South Africa were actually built in Eiger's factory in China. They're also very good at setting up plants. So they've been very supportive of scoping out and sending out some engineers to look at what it would take to build a plant here in South Africa. So we're looking at the usual suspects like in Roslyn, PE, East London, Uitenhage, Gqeberha. You've got, and then Cape Town, of course, Atlantis would Durban, and Atlantis would love a automotive hub. But kind of the Cape Town economy is kind of missing an automotive hub.
That's true.
Interestingly enough, the challenge with that, by the way, with an automotive hub in Cape Town, is the rubbers, glass, like brake pads, all the parts are clusters that are on the other side of the country. So you're across I've looked at it. in the Eastern Cape, in Durban, and in Trolley. So your factory in Cape Town would have to, there's a massive cost on all of the components. So I'm trying to convince component manufacturers to look at locating to Atlantis, and then maybe we can build the car factory. But
It's down the road
so
from me. I can probably look at Atlantis from here.
yeah, yeah. So if you want to know why Cape Town won't get a car factory, it's because we don't have like rubber and windscreen and brake pad suppliers. Like random fact, but yeah.
But that's exactly, Justin, from your story earlier. It triggered so many questions. I mean, one of the things that came to mind was what complementary services or businesses could stem out of this, and you just nailed it. Like you've just said it right there. Like just like it's the first principles approach. If you need brake pads, if you need windscreen wipers, like start from the bottom and build it up. I actually didn't know that there was nothing in Cape Town. So for any aspiring founder in Cape Town, there's something to go and explore.
Well, these clusters are conglomerated around a big automotive plant. So for a plant to work, it needs the suppliers. For the suppliers to have work, it needs the plant. It's like there's a symbiosis that needs to be created.
So they need to come in together.
And time it right. Yeah. Just on the specs, sorry, I got a bit distracted there. The range is 200 kilometers.
Okay.
70 kilowatt hour battery. So I'm basically right now sitting on enough power to power 10 houses.
Wow.
It's like, and it's an amazing amount of power in a very, very little package.
Wow.
So really cool power specs. The engines are interchangeable, so your motor is a little, like it's the size of a watermelon. So when the thing, like when an engine packs up, you kind of take it out, put it on the shelf to look at it later, put a new one in, okay, goodbye. So like you're not sitting there with spark plugs and oil filters and air filters and fan belts and this thing that no one quite understands how it works. They just know it works, called an internal combustion engine. You basically have 8 moving parts and only 8 things can go wrong. And our approach in supporting the vehicle is give us it back. We'll send it away back for warranty. You get a whole new motor that day and just keep driving. So the living with it is quite straightforward. I must say this is a prototype. So this is it makes nobody happy type of model. So we are upgrading a lot of things in this vehicle. So, we're looking at 2 versions where the tourist version has, seats, headrests, but the commuter version doesn't. The tourist version, the shuttle version, the hotel version has a level of finish that the commuter version has a more robust build. So we're looking at two versions, as you can hear, like 2 finishes, 2 specs. And then the nice thing about this platform is we can shove a bunch of toys in here. So it already has an AI camera that uses edge computing to detect following distance, to detect turning movements, and also a driver camera to detect distracted driving, phone, seatbelt. So we can create a much safer environment using an AI camera that we've taken like off the shelf and installed. And it's the first taxi with a reverse camera as standard. Now, why don't they have reverse cameras? So we're trying to put some really cool tech in here to make it safer and to improve it. It's got 13 seats, and it annoyed me when I was doing my test drives for the first week. You're doing it on test grounds. No one was taking pictures, and I was like, guys, do you not realize this is like the first electric minibus? It just looks like a normal minibus. You would not in its white form. You wouldn't be able
to. Which I think is a good thing.
Yeah.
So tell me, Justin, what is the distance that a taxi typically travels on a day? Because if you have a 200K range, I think that's probably the biggest question to answer, right? Like, is it enough to cover a day? And if not, how can you charge it?
Yep. So the answer to that question is that there's no such thing as a typical taxi.
Okay.
There are buckets of operation, and there are buckets of taxi. So this model will never be able to do Cape Town, Eastern Cape. It's just too far. Never going to happen. But it could do Cape Town, Stellenbosch. It could do Hammanskraal, Pretoria. So it can do these longer distances where the guy drives, parks for the day, drives back in the afternoon, or drives back. The and then your typical kind of local trips are between 13 and 35 kilometers single way. So 26 to 70 round trip. And so when we have, I mean, we're sitting on millions of kilometers of taxi data, right? We know how they operate in multiple geographies. So we first have profiled, that's why we first put them in buckets. And we look at the data, and the data tells us, is this a local taxi, a regional taxi, or a long distance based on its operational characteristics? And then we look at range characteristics. And what's interesting about the range characteristics is it's more important, not the distance driven, but the amount of time in between trips where it's at the rank. Because if there's enough time in between, and because then you can charge it. Yeah. So we call it dwell time. Yeah.
And I mean, the play isn't here to replace every single taxi on the road. You actually want to start where it makes economically most sense, right? And which I think is why your data is so important, because you can literally point out these 100 guys are the ones that will make the most money switching over, because we know how long they stand, we know how far they drive, we know everything, and we can model this thing out and go to them with a proposition and say, here's a better solution for you.
Especially because they've optimized the routes. And from the previous story that you said, that you've optimized the routes, you understand the routes, you understand how to make them more efficient. So it plugs in so perfectly.
Yeah. Like, guys, you don't need so many. So let's replace these ones with electric. Let's take these diesels, which are in good shape, and let's put them on long distance. And these other diesels that are also in good shape, hey, let's go do some staff transport work. So it's all about changing the perception of the rolling stock, that you don't only have to be in your local operation doing local work. You can think of your fleet as that being diversified. And so we're quite keen to see local taxi owners and operators that we've been talking to. They engage with the idea. They love the idea. They're of course skeptical until they see it on their own operation, because you'll remember transport operators, they want to see it in their own, like in their own operations. But once it gets started to get adopted, we think that operators will take the electric for their premium trips, or for their staff transport trips, or for their local trips. And then they will circulate their long distance taxis into, their local taxi, diesel taxis into long distance. And in their long distances, they might put into other operations. So the market's just going to shift down. And then, we're going to find our little niche. So we're definitely not going to try and replace 250,000 vehicles this decade. It's like more than a decade's worth of turnover.
That's awesome.
I want to go to a sticky subject, which is, how are the taxi associations working with you? Because we know that is a sticky situation on its own. How have they been? How has that negotiations been going? How are they adopting this? I mean, when you tell them that life cycles costs over time, like, how are they landing? How are they working with you?
Yeah. So the taxi industry is always interesting to work with. It's a body with many voices and many, views. And, there isn't one thing as the industry. There's the industry in Rustenburg. It's made up of up to 8 associations. There's the industry in Bulkwani with 6 or 3. Bombela has 6 associations. I think Gauteng South has 69, 70 associations. And each association operates in its own manner. So at a very high level, Santaco national, and Santaco regional bodies are very excited about the vehicle. Of course, they understand value chains and are asking, well, what's this value chain look like? And how can we ensure that the industry participates in the value chain, which is something we believe strongly in, which is the basis for our charging model, and the basis for our distribution model is going to be a local oriented distribution and charging model, where the local association can participate and benefit and run and be part of the entire turnkey value chain. The national taxi associations and the Department of Transport, everyone's looking at how to subsidize the taxi without giving the taxi cash subsidy. So you subsidize it by building infrastructure for it. You subsidize it by building plaster lanes for it. You also subsidize it by doubling the recap. And one of the things I'm lobbying for is to say, you can recap your diesel taxi today or with a value of like about 100K or so. But if you want to recap and replace it with an electric, let's give you a rebate of 200. And so working with the levers that are already in place of the state to accelerate the adoption, working with the association. And, we're not trying to displace, ban, replace, or get anybody into trouble here. We're trying to make sure that your existing operations can be more profitable, more efficient, and, not run out of steam. And there's, of course, skepticism, as there would be, because, as I said, working with transport operators, you're working with skeptics and realists.
Yeah.
And I think we will, as we build, it's very important to build in the first 1 or 2 demonstrator hubs so that you can put 10 to 20 vehicles to work, so that the owners and the operators and the associations and the leadership and the politicians and whoever wants to can come and get in a taxi, drive it around, experience it, be at the hub, look at how it charges, and then talk to the drivers and ask them, is this thing working for you? Hey? You can tell me honestly, is it working for you? And that word of mouth will then be all you need to convince people that they could take a chance and buy their first one. And once they buy their first one, I think we know where this ends.
Sure. No, I'm incredibly bullish. I mean, having worked closely sort of with the industry at Sweep South, like I mentioned earlier, and I think everybody's got an eye on the industry because we were all exposed to it at some point in South Africa. And to hear that you've also expanded overseas already, and you're going to be, using the same models. I mean, I think you're geared for a very interesting future. I think we're all going to be plugging in and watching you for the next 5 to 10, 15 years. So, Justin, we're wishing you the best of luck. It sounds amazing.
No, thanks so much. It's as I say, it's like, it's just been an itch to scratch. Like, why isn't there? Why doesn't this exist? And I'll just quickly tell you about the hubs that we're planning. So we got some funding from the Department of Science and Technology, their Uyilo 5-starter program. And so we designed a EV hub that can be rank adjacent. So when you've got a taxi rank, you don't want your charging inside the rank because it's busy and the vehicles in and out, and so you're in the way. So you want what I call rank adjacent. So right next to the rank, you build a facility. That facility will be a fast charging hub. That facility will be able to support 50 DC charging. And it will kind of, be able to support about 300 vehicles per day or 300 charge slots per day. So you can support an enormous amount of vehicles on a very small footprint with management. So we designed this hub we got, the permission from Stellenbosch municipality to design the concept for the BAX taxi rank in Stellenbosch. So we've got plans and designs for a 16-bay charging hub for BAX as one demonstrator on a public taxi rank. And then we have Century City we're in discussions with them with 100 taxis on a private space, commercial space, and a different configuration for the hub. So we designed these 2 hubs, and then with the funding from Uyilo, we open sourced the design, and we published a 100-page design manual so that any municipal engineer and any municipal official could design a charging station of their own or a charging hub of their own. So we'll also be releasing that very soon, which is an open source manual for municipalities to build their own hubs. Thanks to the funding from Uyilo.
Yeah, I'm not surprised that you're getting all this funding. I think this could be the ripple effect of what the EV industry needs. It's all these little EVs happening different pockets, and I think this one could be the big one that sends the tide out. So, Justin, it's been fascinating to hear your story, and we're going to be following very closely. So, thank you for joining. It's been a fascinating story to hear, and I look forward to it. Really, any last words?
No, Justin, pretty cool. And I can see how your worlds get together here, like your GoMetro and what you're building here, and how these things are going to complement each other. So excited to see where it goes, and looking forward to see these taxis on the road.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, thank you so much for the time, guys.
Sorry, lost you for a second.
Thanks. Yeah, no worries. Yeah, thank you so much, guys. And anybody who's listening, please, let us know how you want to get involved. And we think it's a movement, not a startup.
Oh, I love that.
Awesome.
And snap. Thank you very much, Justin. That was awesome.
Thanks, Justin. Nice chatting to you.
Thanks, guys. Good to see you.